Hey everybody, welcome back to another Office Hours with all things MSP. Now today's episode is about compliance. And of course, you can't talk about compliance in this industry without talking to Tim Golden, who is probably one of the most recognized names when it comes to compliance inside of the MSP space. And of course, Tim is representing Compliance Scorecard, the company that he founded. And Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me. And wow, those are some pretty big words to live up to, but I appreciate the sentiment. But yeah, thank you so much. Having been dealing with compliance for 20 years, I still feel like I sometimes don't know what the hell I'm doing, but yeah, certainly have a long-standing history of all things compliance as they relate to MSPs and small businesses. But thank you for that.
Well, I think that feeling, number one, comes from there's a lot of imposter syndrome in this industry where all of us, at one point or another, or for the entire time we've been doing this, feel like imposters. But I think a lot of that comes from the fact that we work in technology. Technology is changing every single day. And right now, it seems compliance is actually changing probably faster than technology.
That is true. I mean, CIS, right? The Center for Internet Security literally just updated 8.1. And guess what? They added a govern function. It took NIST years to finally realize that, govern was actually needed. And CIS followed suit and pushed that out literally a couple days ago. And so we're excited to have an actual govern domain or a govern function, because that is literally why we built Compliance Scorecard.
Well, and a lot of people they often lump, the compliance and governance into the same thing. They don't recognize that there's a difference between the two. So maybe the best place to start this conversation is explaining the difference between compliance and governance.
Yeah, and really governance is a component of the overall compliance program, right? MSPs, we started with kind of break fix, we moved into MRR, we moved into cybersecurity, and now this compliance thing, right? But a compliance program has, a couple of different components. They call it GRC for a reason, right? Governance, risk, and then the compliance aspect, right? And so that they're all kind of interweaved together, right? And when I think about, we'll get into this in a little bit, like what is a compliance as a service offering, right? What can I do as an MSP to build out a compliance as a service package to help our customers, right? But it really starts with that core foundation of governing, right? Governance. And it's funny because our good friends at LionGuard, Joe, called me out about a month or so ago on one of our live streams and was like, explain it to me like I'm 5. And I was like, well, to govern. And he's like, yeah, that's not good enough. And so, us as technology people, us as, us geeks that love ones and zeros and acronyms and bytes and bits, right? Trying to have that conversation with our customer and throwing in the word compliance or throwing in the word governance or risk. Like, we need to tell it to them like they're 5. And so when we think of govern, and if we go back to the root of where that word started from, it is to literally steer the ship through the narrow channels. Again, paraphrasing, but to steer a ship. Now, when we think about this in terms of technology, compliance, risk, those things, we want to help steer our MSP clients to better defensible, to better security posture, to better practices. We want to govern, or we want to steer them in the right direction.
Okay. And you could also, I think, probably put it in the context of governance being guide rails, right? And which basically you're doing the same thing. You're using those guide rails to steer in a certain direction.
Yeah, we love sometimes using sports analogy, right? And I look at like this whole GRC, this whole governance, risk, and compliance as like the referee of cybersecurity, right? We know we're supposed to be doing things and whatnot, but the compliance piece, the governed function of doing the work, and the compliance piece of the guardrails or the playbook, and kind of pulling that all together as a referee. Like if you think of any sport, they have a referee. That referee knows the playbook, they know the rules, they know the regulations, and they call foul and throw the red flag or the yellow card or whatever it is, depending on the sport. They're the ones kind of helping guide that whole program, that whole compliance program. And so, all of these things kind of meld together as steering the ship, figuring out the risks that are in that sort of channel, the rocks that they might stumble upon, and then kind of guiding that through the regulations, for anybody that's done any boating, read on right returning, right? All of those kinds of things, the buoys, the compliance aspect.
So for MSPs, I think it's pretty obvious why compliance is important, because I think they understand. But why does a small to medium-sized business care about compliance?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you mentioned in the beginning, the guardrails are shifting rapidly, right? When we think of things like, I don't know, FTC safeguards, for example, and Whistleblowers Act, and they just updated HIPAA and CMMC. The rules of the game are changing, and those are getting pushed downstream to the small business. And while it might be a big, scary risk or compliance word, the reality is this can help you better protect your business, better protect your customers' data. So as a small business, yeah, I get it. You probably don't want to spend money on cybersecurity and compliance and all that tech stuff because, Johnny's Donut Factory, all I care about is making the donuts. However, some of these compliance things will help better protect, I don't know, your supply chain, for example, right? You have no idea if the milk that you're getting in your donut factory is actually safe, right? Until you try it and realize, oh my gosh, it is or it isn't. Now, I'm kind of, it's a little bit of a stretch there to think that compliance can prove your milk is safe. But if you think about the people that buy your donuts, their data, your contact lists, right? You wouldn't want that being, subject to some kind of incident and all that data getting out there, and you're the one responsible for leaking everybody's information.
Yeah, but to go back to your milk analogy, I think governance would be the manufacturer putting the expiration date on the carton, the person who's making the donuts checking the expiration date on the carton before they use the milk.
See, my work is done here. You got it, right? See, I know you see, as you said in the beginning, you're not a compliance expert, but you got it, right? Like you have a process, you have that governed process, that function of I'm going to put the expiration date and Eric's going to make sure that it's not expired before he dumps it into a 100-pound batch of donuts.
Right. And by doing so, at each point, I'm the referee. Yeah, did I pull all the analogies together properly?
You pulled it all together, right? See, my work is done here, right? And I think there's a very key thing that we just went through in this exercise. We made it relatable. Right? We had that conversation in terms that we all could understand. And I think that's the challenge with a lot of MSPs is not just educating themselves about this stuff, but making it relatable to the small business so they understand. Right? We could go on and on about the defense industrial base and the CMMC stuff that's been happening for the last couple of years and almost ready to be done. Right? Like, you won't get a contract, right? Once that goes into full effect and you're not following the rules, the regulations, the compliance, the components, you're not going to get those contracts. Yep. And your competitor will get it. Or you might be kicked out of a contract, right? And so the more relatable as an MSP you can make that conversation, the better.
Yeah. And that's something that, business owners can relate to. Owners can relate to losing business because they don't have a checkbox checked and they're not doing the right things. And
Mhm.
this week, as we're recording this, there was just an incident that had to do with a regulated industry. And you mentioned FTC before. So we had the big CDK incident. And
Yeah.
so that affects a lot of car dealerships. And of course, car
I think the
dealerships,
last number I saw was like 16,000. Don't quote me, but it was a lot.
yeah, it was a lot. And those car dealerships fall under FTC because they handle data related to car loans and finance and things like that. So is there some type of is there a way to describe how a dealership who had FTC compliant systems in place, safeguards, governance, whatever, versus one that didn't would fare or have less risk in this type of situation?
Well, because of the third and fourth party of the chain, right? And not all the details are out about how this all unfolded.
Hmm.
And some of them are. I don't want to get on all the gory details of what's known and unknown, but could following FTC safeguards prevented this? Probably not. But had you had correct policies and procedures, had you had, well-defined third-party risk management, had you done your own governance, your own due diligence, and been vigilant on staying, up to date, number one, you probably would have been informed quicker and had, oh, maybe a disaster recovery, business continuity, some way to pivot so that not all your eggs were in one basket, but you've now had maybe an opportunity like your egg supplier is gone because, something happened to the chickens. Now I have to go find another egg supplier because I had all of those eggs in one basket. Now, could a DR plan, disaster recovery, could a third party risk management plan, could have that prevented it? No, but you could have been a little bit better prepared, or at least been able to have a fallback plan, right? And heaven forbid, they're doing it on pen and paper now. So I would say that the lesson learned, not just with the CDK, but with all of these things that keep happening, is understand where your risk is, and then determine what you want to do about that, right? Determine, do I need to have multiple egg suppliers, or is it possible for me to use multiple, tools as an automotive dealership to maintain those pieces? And coming from I used to be a mechanic at a Dodge dealership, so I get it. Like, sometimes your only choice is one egg in one basket.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, one of the things that is interesting to me about FTC is the type of companies that it covers. Because, you know,
Yeah.
before, we talk about CMMC, we talk about HIPAA. Those are not always industries that an MSP is dealing with. But now that you've got FTC, you're talking about car dealerships, you're talking about accountants, you're talking about mortgage brokers, which are much more likely
CPA
to fall in the patch of an MSP.
CPA firms, right? CPA, I mean, they have access to financial data. And while it doesn't explicitly call out car dealerships, CPAs, furniture companies, blah, 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 like, wait a minute, you're an MSP. And if you're doing hardware as a service, right?
Hmm.
Well, like, think of this, right? So you're an MSP, you're doing hardware as a service. Chances are you've done some financial investigation on that company that you're leasing equipment
Yep.
to. Now you have that data. It probably applies to you. Now, granted, there are some thresholds, and I've actually found contradictory information about the thresholds, because if you read 3.14, the ruling, it says 5,000 records. But fast forward a couple of months, and there's another thing that came out from FTC that said any incident involving 500 records is reportable. So while the ruling says 5,000, you have to report on anything over 500. So chances are it's always good business practice to follow something,
Right.
whether it's CIS, FTC, any of it, right? Regardless of whether you think you should legally obligated to.
Yeah, and that's where
You should always.
the term defensibility comes in, right?
Absolutely.
Because even if you don't have a legal requirement, if something happens, you are still going to have to defend yourself legally if somebody sues you. And so if you're doing the things that are recommended best practices, recognized best practices, according to CIS, NIST, FTC, whatever, then you are going to be more defensible as a client and as an MSP.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Again, back to the sports analogy. You don't leave your goal unattended.
Right.
Right. You have a goalie there. Or, you don't leave first base or home plate unattended. You have a player there, right? Like you have that defensibility, and when the stuff hits the fan,
Mm-hmm.
The days of, I'm going to use a political term, the days of plausible deniability are over.
Correct.
You can't claim ignorance anymore. Like the amount of things that have been spewed all over the media in the last 5 or 10 years, you can't just put blinders on anymore, right? And so when stuff hits the fan and you're sitting either in front of a lawyer or judge or arbitration, whistleblower, whatever, they're going to ask you, what did you do? Well, we didn't know. Yeah, that's not going to stand up anymore. Well, we did nothing. Okay. And then tie in the insurance, right? We haven't even touched on that yet here today. Like, is insurance going to say, oh, we asked you and you completely lied or falsified your questionnaire. Where's the proof that you're doing that? Right. To kind of move into that compliance as a service offering and tying it back into the insurance component, right?
Right. And it needs to be a service because it's ongoing. It's not one and done.
It's not. It's not just like, antivirus is not one and done, right? Or MDR or whatever you want to call those, acronyms for protecting your endpoint, or spam filtering. It's never one and done. Right. And so, when we think about what is a compliance as a service offering for an MSP, I'm supposed to use hand gestures and I'm trying to get it right. Right. So it's 6 things, right? 4 of which you're probably already doing, right? Security awareness training, backups, next gen AV, right? 4 or 5 of these things you're already doing, but you're probably missing 2, right? You're missing assessments, ongoing assessments, right? And then the policies and procedures to back that all up, to build that defensibility. So the 6 things, right? 4 of which you're probably already doing, right? Adding on the other 2 components is not very hard at all, especially with, compliance, with Compliance Scorecard, right? So when we think about building a CaaS, or compliance as a service offering, you're probably already doing most of them. Adding on 1 or 2 components and then packaging that all together as a compliance as a service offering, which you can now do at scale, you can do efficiently, you can do affordably, you can essentially double your revenue with those, 6 things, and reduce your risk and reduce your customers' risk.
So you guys offer the framework, the tools for an MSP to add those 2 other components, the thumbs.
Yeah, the thumbs. Yeah, I mean, we do way more than that, right? Because we tie into MSP specific tools, like vulnerability management from ConnectSecure, Nodeware, LionGuard, Microsoft Graph. Like our sole focus is to tie in those MSP tools to prove this along the way, right? Let me dispel a myth, and it bugs me because I hear it all the time. And that is, can't you just automate that? I mean, this platform can automate stuff, and that platform markets, compliance automation. Well, if you actually dig into the automated components, first and foremost, most of the tools that they integrate with are not MSPs, right? Like MSPs don't care about AWS, and nor does their customers, right?
Right.
MSPs probably don't use ClickUp or Monday or the 1,000 other tools that they might integrate with. No. I want a platform that's going to tie into my ConnectWise, my Ninja, my CyberDrain, my LionGuard, my Nodeware, my tools.
Right.
And that is what we are focusing on, and being able to say, are you doing vulnerability management? That's one of the 6 things. Yes. And we're doing that with Nodeware, Connect Secure, insert whatever MSP tool here. Great. Are you doing backups? Yes. Acronis, Veeam, blah, 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 blah. Oh, we integrate with those. Are you doing policies and procedures? Yes. Inside Compliance Scorecard. Are you doing assessments? Yes. Inside Compliance Scorecard. So those 6 things are the tools that we're tying into or we're building out to actually prove compliance in the best automated way that we can. So MSPs, if you're being sold a bill of goods when they market to you as compliance automation, especially in those enterprise tools that don't know us. They don't know what we do. They don't know what we integrate with. They're not us. I mean, who cares about ClickUp or Monday?
Well, I do because I use
but we integrate.
But
right.
One of the things that I know you personally do a lot of, and that ties into Compliance Scorecard as well, is you guys provide a lot for the community in terms of content, in terms of peer groups. So let's talk about that for a little bit. So if I'm an MSP
Sure.
and I know nothing about compliance, do you guys have resources that they can go access and kind of get an idea of what they're getting themselves into, what they need to start thinking about, even before they reach out to do a new offering, a compliance as a service offering?
Sure. Before I kind of share some of the specific resources, let me talk about the peer group for a moment, right? We always talk about people, process, technology, and platform, right? And so the peer group this is really how Compliance Scorecard started, which was building a peer group to teach MSPs about all these things, right? And so, the peer group really pulls in that people part, really gives you an opportunity to learn, not just from me, because I'm not just a talking head, but from other MSPs that are trying to figure this out as well. Right. A good example, we just went through every control of CIS. All right. All the way up. Well, we went through most of the controls and then the controls changed yesterday, but we went through control by control and we talked about how do you do it? How do you do it? What does this really mean? How do we make money off of this? Right. And so the peer group is really an intimate way to kind of have those conversations amongst your peers that's facilitated week after week. Probably don't want to ask on Reddit and get blown up, right? You want to be able to have, I hate to say, the safe space to have the conversation, but our peer group allows for that. Out of that peer group, comes a bunch of resources that we have built that I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. We should put that together and put it on, as a download for MSPs like yourself. I just posted yesterday about our pricing calculator. I've been literally walking MSPs through how to build a package, what goes into it, how much labor is involved, how to sell it, the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I should take Tim's this whole thing and put it out there. And so, I threw that video up yesterday and the interest was like, I want that. So, we do have a bunch of resources already on our website. Just go grab them. I don't know, Eric, if you want to kind of pull up some of those pieces yet or not, but one of the biggest one is, how do I do policies and procedures? How do I do that govern function, right? What goes into that? And not only does this guide help you walk through it, I mean, sure, you can do it in Word docs and Excel, but that won't get you there at scale.
Right.
Of course, we're going to offer this and we're going to talk through how you can do this work and then where Compliance Scorecard can come in and help you literally understand this. Yeah, it is a lot of reading for this one guide, but this first one is all about what am I doing? And then that ties into many of the others, like building out your compliance as a service game plan, right? And building out what goes in this, like some misconceptions and some realities, right? How to do it, why it's important, the benefits, the cost analysis, right? And then from there, actually going to do it with what we've defined as a very simple 4-part process for governing, right? I know this is a little small. Let me see if I can bump it up a wee bit, right? So I'm going to kind of move this over here. This is the govern function as we have defined a process to help MSPs, right? The first part is the alignment piece, right? Is the company aligned to a framework? Is a policy aligned to a control? Is a thing aligned to a thing? Do you have your guardrails or your playbook to follow? Yay, I know what I'm doing. I'm following CIS. Here's the controls. Yes, I'm aligning the company and the procedure. Great. But you know what? This isn't your stuff. It's your customers. It's up to them to authorize these things. You can facilitate the work. As technical advisors, you can help them guide them through the work. You better be charging for the work. But it's really up to them to authorize it. Yes, this is our asset list. Yes, this is our password policy, employee handbook. It is up to them to authorize that stuff.
And that's an important point that I think frequently gets missed. One of the places I see this a lot is when MSPs are filling out, say, the insurance checklist for a client. They can't do that. They can help them, like you talked about, but they can't be the person who actually authorizes it.
Exactly, because you're on the hook versus them on the hook, right? And it really should be them because it's their stuff.
Right.
We are facilitating the work. We are charging for the work. A good way to think about this is like you hire a lawyer. A lawyer prepares a bunch of documents for X, Y, and Z. Well, you need you and a notary to sign off that, right? To authorize that. It's the same process. It's just a different side of the business.
Right.
Right. So that authorization step, and when we looked at all the GRC platforms, nobody was doing this. Upload your document. Well, you missed all the steps before that. And the key one is involving your customer in making their own business risk decisions and actually authorizing stuff. Great. Now that things are authorized, what good's a password policy if your end users don't get trained on it, sign off, and adopt it? Building that culture of defensibility, building that culture of security mindset first. Hey, we authorized the password policy. Now we have to explain the why so the users understand it and adopt it. And then lastly, the assessment piece. Stuff shouldn't become shelfware. You mentioned that in the beginning, Eric, like ongoing, continuous. MSPs, we want MRR. We want to have that ongoing, continuous revenue. Well, how do we do that? By continually assessing things, by continually rolling things out on a cadence. And so this simplifies that govern function into 4 easy components: alignment, authorization, adoption, and assessment.
And you mentioned something a few minutes ago before we got into the 4As about scalability. And I think that's an important point to make here, because compliance used to be limited to larger organizations who could do this work manually. Now, what you've done is you've built a platform that now allows people to bring this down to smaller clients who would not have the internal resources to do these types of compliances. And it not only helps reduce the risk, But in a lot of cases, especially when we're talking about CMMC, there's opportunity to be gained by being compliant and being able to prove that compliance.
Exactly. If you want to pull down the slides, I can talk a little bit about that here for a minute, right? And so, you know, having a process, right? We always talked about people, process, platform, right? Notice how I use platform instead of technology, right? Having this for a process and having a platform to bring that through at scale, right? We looked at Compliance Scorecard at write the thing once, deploy it many. Assess the thing once, deploy it, like that whole efficiency.
Right.
Right. And so as an MSP, you better be doing this work on yourself. I know that sounds harsh, but you better be drinking your own champagne. And the benefit of using Compliance Scorecard is you do this work once for yourself, and now you can roll it out at scale, quote, quote, in minutes to your customer.
And
now, granted, conversations have to happen, but write once, deploy many, right? We all, for those techies that know that, like write once, deploy many, with that, like that is literally why we built the platform, so you could gain that, economy of scale along the way.
Yeah, back in my RMM days, we used to say if you do it more than once, you should automate it.
Script. That's literally a sign on my wall. If I have to do it more than once, script it.
Yep.
And that's how MSPs actually started, right? We started with the break fix, doing all these one-off things, and we recognized, a tool can probably help with, I don't know, pushing patches. Great. Automate the patching. And then a tool can help with, I don't know, vulnerabilities, identifying them and remediating them. And now a tool, Compliance Scorecard, can help automate that process of compliance and governing.
And the assessments as well. Because like we said before, that has to be ongoing.
Yes, exactly. There's always been this big push for the last, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, 9 years on start with an assessment. And I'll give you, I love storytelling, so I'll give you a little analogy. I was on with one of our customers the other day, and he's like, I'm really struggling to try to sell this. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me about the customer. And he's like, well, they're an audiologist, if I say that right, ear doctor. Yep. They're an ear doctor, and HIPAA, they're kind of on the fence. And how we kind of walked through that scenario with him was, tell you what, do you have hearing problems? Huh? Do you have hearing problem? What? Yeah. So you go to your audiologist, your ear doctor, and what's the first thing he's going to do? Oh, he's going to do an evaluation. He's going to do an assessment. Exactly. He's going to do an assessment to determine what's wrong, prescribe you some things, and maybe have you do PT. That is the same thing that you're doing. You're going to do a security assessment. You're going to determine the things that are going well and not going well. And then you're going to give him some medicine and put them on physical training over a period of time. And when I talked to him like that, he got it. And then he ran to his customer and he, texted me last night and he's like, oh my God, he totally understood it. We're getting going next week. That goes back to full circle, making the conversation relatable to your small business.
Yes. And that's the most important part, because small businesses, they're very focused on what they're concerned with. And that's very much the day-to-day. It's very much like MSPs. And I loved it when you talked about how we used to start out as break fix. And it's very, to an MSP, this is very relatable, right? Because I come from the day when we did virus updates, we did patch management, we did all of those things going from seat to seat to seat. Very inefficient. And you could only do so many clients a month by doing that, because it was a truck roll every single time. It was a half hour per computer because internet was slow back then. That's why in order to grow, you have to scale. And in order to scale, you have to automate.
Exactly. And so, compliance is not the next thing. It is the current thing. Right. We have migrated our way as IT professionals from the guy that fixed my printer to being the technical business advisor,
Yes.
right? And MSPs, like if you're doing assessments or if you're not doing assessments, you should be. If you are doing assessments, you should charge for that work, or you should make sure that your monthly seat price is high enough to cover that, because there is labor involved and you need to at least cover your own labor, right? It's a whole nother conversation I have with our clients is, oh yeah, we do assessments and it's baked in. And I was like, oh, that's great. What's your per seat price? $30. Okay, so you're $30 a seat. How long does it take you to do an assessment? I don't know, 15 hours total with reporting. How are you recouping that
Right.
15 hours at $30 a head?
Yep.
Right. So yeah, it's here. It's not going anywhere, and we can help you build a package plan, a go-to-market strategy around that. But the reality is you should do something. I say this all the time on Team 10. Start something, start someplace, start now, right? Pick a thing and go. And it does not have to be hard or scary, right? I want to leave, before we end here, I want to leave your entire audience with a nugget and a challenge. I don't know what day of the week this will air, but since today is Friday for me, and it is, I don't know, almost 2:00. So let's say I want you to open up your calendar. I want you to pick 2:00 on a Friday, and I want you to mark that time as blocked off, busy. And I want you to set it to reoccurring every week for the next 6 weeks. And I want you at that time, shut everything off. Maybe get a pen and a paper, doesn't matter. And I want you to sit down and write down a couple of key things you want to get done the following week. The point here is 1 hour once a week, build that habit, and then go to 2 hours, and then go to 4 days a week, and then go to 5 days a week. And you can actually do this work in your business, on your business, and for your small customer. It'll be hard at first, but I'll challenge you. Block off 1 hour once a week, turn everything off, and go do something in compliance, in policy, and in something.
Yep.
I've now gotten to 3 hours a day, every day, that I can choose to book, but I choose to work on the business, around the business, building out policies, building out stuff. So I'm going to leave your audience with that challenge.
And that's a great challenge. By the way, it's something that I do it a little bit differently, but I do pretty much the same thing. I set aside about 2 hours a day for that type of work. I'm an early riser, so it's first thing in the morning rather than 2:00 in the afternoon.
Me too.
But I notice the difference the most when I don't do it.
There you go.
And until you do it, you won't notice the difference. When you start doing it and then you miss a day or you miss a week,
Yep.
you will completely notice how much that puts you in the right mindset. It prepares you better for the things that are going to come up during the week. And it just, there's no question as to how much it will help you in your business as well as your personal life when you do.
I mean, I get it. It was really hard for me at first. Yes. It took me probably the better part of a month to go from 1 day to 2 days, and then from 2 days to 4 days. It was really difficult. But once I got rolling and once I got into that rhythm of dedicating time to work on a thing, and maybe the thing is writing a policy internally, going through 5 or 6 controls internally. Are you doing the control? What tool satisfies that control, right? How is my team responding to that control? Do they know what to do? Taking that 1 hour once a day, or for me now, 3 hours every day.
Yep. Well, Tim, thank you very much. Of course, I will be adding all of the links to all of the things that you showed today, and probably more, to the post, to the video when it comes out. Tim, again, thank you so much for being here today. Do appreciate it, and I appreciate your support of all things MSP.
Yeah, Eric, I'm so glad about, being here, being a sponsor, more because not because of the, having these kinds of things and being in front of everybody as a sponsor, but more because of what you're doing in your community as well. Right. I think as you're building all things MSP and you're providing this valuable content to your members, I think that's amazing. And I think there needs to be more people like yourself doing this kind of work. So for those of you that are listening here and you are interested in kind of working with Eric to kind of get the message out from an educational standpoint, think about being a sponsor, right? We do this because we want to help educate the community, not just to get our pretty face on a webinar, but because we want to provide real value. And I think there's a lot of other vendors out there that want to do the same.
Yep. I don't think we really even mentioned Compliance Scorecard in the first 3/4 of today's video. So definitely providing the educational content. And I know, Tim, you are so big on that. And I'm so glad that we kind of meet in terms of philosophy there. So thanks again.